This right here is a little version of a mini traveller. The normal size of a mini traveller is still a miniature sort of version of the minor traveller. It's a mini with a lovely wooden facade. My friend Johnny's dad, Mike, has had one for about 35 or 40 years now, and after 20 or so years of making lovely memories with it, sadly it ended up in a garage and then it ended up under a piece of tarpaulin in the driveway. Johnny and I have spoke about this car for many years, hatched various different plans, and nothing really came into fruition until about a week ago, where I bought it off Mike with the intention of restoring it. One thing he did mention, however, is it would be cool if it was kind of like stayed a little bit rough and ready and not restored back to immaculate factory settings. I really quite like the way it looks, especially with the ghost wood. That's where the wood used to be is the old almond green colour, and at some point Mike sprayed it Brooklyn's racing green, but then at some point afterwards the wood came off, so it's left with this ghost shadow of the wood, which I think looks really cool. Anyway, we need to find the fine line between keeping the patina and making it structurally sound. So the first thing we need to do in this first episode is take it apart and see how bad it really is.
So it got delivered in the pouring rain, so it's one soggy moggy. That grey wheel on the back I had to put on because the other one was seized to get it off the low loader that it got delivered on. Having known this car for a few years and seen its wheels underneath the tarpaulin a couple of times, it's really cool to have a real closer look at it and poke it with a stick to find out which bits are metal and which bits are rust and holes. If it was a competition, I would say it was an easy 50-50 split, but as you can see, some of it's solid and some of it is quite questionable. That's solid, but then you kind of squidge it and that's downright dangerous. Yeah, that part is coming away and there is a big old hole right there. There's holes everywhere, holes all over the place. Anyway, let's get the rest of the car from the inside. Mike must have dismantled it at some point, so a lot of the parts are actually inside the boot. This is all of the wood. Luckily, it's all still there. I am yet to decide whether it goes back on or not. I'm feeling it shouldn't, but it is there, so we have the choice later on in time, but that'll probably be the last thing. Anyway, there's the rest of it. There's the free grills, because a Mini needs free grills. Luckily, all of the interior is in rather good disheveled condition, so we can use that again, because that makes the whole project a lot cheaper, because finding that stuff sucks. But there's a whole load of boxes. Anyway, clearing it out, we find the really important bit of wood. This is the most important bit because it holds the bonnet open, and we can have a closer look at the engine. Well, what is left of it, because as you can see, if you know what you're looking at, some of the ancillaries are missing, but this is actually the second engine this car has had. So if we remove the bonnet with 4 of these bolts, we can have a closer look. We can get all in on its grille. But this is quite an early engine in itself. It's got remote change and Hardy spicers, but first we need to remove the carburettor, because the plan is we're going to remove it all from the bottom of the car, and that is a tiny carburettor, isn't it? It could be a lawnmower or something. Anyway, we're going to remove all of the parts from the gear shaft, because that is going to come away when we lift the car off from the engine. A lot of the bolts were seized, and I didn't realise that there was a single bolt holding that in underneath, but we're hindsight is 2020. Anyway, this ghost helped me because I was on the other side loosening the bolt on the other side, and the ghost was holding onto the spanner. We need to remove all of the bolts from the subframe, so there's 4 on the top, 2 in the cockpit where the ghost was helping, and then these 2 bolts on the front. And then we also need to lift it up and remove the steering rack joint. So this bolt connects the steering wheel to the wheel. So if we get the hammer, bash it off, because we're not going to be using that again because it's buggered. And yeah, then we can strap it up to an engine hoist and kind of try and lift the shell off of the engine and all of the bits in between. So as we slowly lift it up, you can see it starts to turn into a transformer. Oh, look at that. So everything that's on the floor, the exhaust, the gearbox, the wheels, the subframe, the engine, and yeah, I kind of dented that bit. I didn't really think it through, but it looks pretty cool. Don't it look like this? But you can really see all of the problems. It looks a lot worse when you look up close like that. Anyway, we're going to lower it onto this trolley, and we're going to start removing the other parts. Next, there are 4 bolts in the wheel well that we can use to remove the door, just like that. Lovely. And then you can make measures into lightening the vehicle by removing most of it that came in powder form with a hammer. This must be an aftermarket feature. It is a suspension for the hinge of the back door. Never seen that before, and we might remove remove that function because it's not very useful. Anyway, we're going to remove the back doors. They're absolutely amazing. These Hearst-style doors got me into the Mini in the first place, and it made me get a Mini Club and Estate when I was 18. It was amazing. Anyway, we're going to remove this rear wheel so we can remove the rear subframe. This is the frame that holds the rear wheels to the engine. And after a bunch of snap bolts and a lot of wiggling and lots of crunching because there's rust everywhere, we managed to get that free. And we can have a look at the bottom, and if you look closely, you can see that jack stand is actually poking through the floor. Let's get the rest of it out. So we'll remove this driver's seat and also remove this beautiful homemade dash. I'm sorry, Mike, I couldn't get out in one piece. And then we're gonna remove all of the car that fell to the ground. I have a feeling this stuff is not salvageable. Anyway, we're gonna get all of these seeds out, and then I found this other aftermarket feature on this Mini, and this Mini only, and you can basically, it's a storage device for your vacuum cleaner, so you can put it through and then walk away, and it's still there when you left it. Hoover up the rest of the Mini that came in powder form and tried to start removing the front wings. I tried to remove them all in one piece to try and salvage them, but it turns out these were replacements in themselves, and they had been seam welded onto the rest of the car, which meant it was very hard to remove it, so I had to start cutting it away and try not to damage any of the other panels around it.
You can liken a car like the Mini to a backpack. Yeah, I know, I am going somewhere with this, just wait for it. So a backpack is made from a collection of specifically cut out pieces of fabric to make a 3D object. That's very much the same as the Mini. It's made from specific pieces of sheet steel that have been cut and formed into certain shapes, and then all welded together to be a 3D metal backpack on wheels. Luckily, we live in a world where a Mini is still quite a popular classic car, to the point that there are still companies that produce replacement panels. Here's one. And here is another panel. It is a very big one. This is the wing, the replacement part for the bit that we just cut off. For the big complicated pieces, we're going to use these panels as it's going to vastly speed up the process. It is going to add quite a bit more cost to the project, but it's going to drastically cut down the amount of time it's going to take. And also, it's going to make it look a lot more proper and probably more structurally sound.
The most annoying part is the wings didn't actually need replacing, but we needed to get to everything that was underneath the wings, because this is a strategically structural part of the car. This is what is left of the wing, so I had to pull it all off from the other panels around it so we can put the other ones in. Technically, we could have reused the other wings and just welded them back on, but it would have looked proper bodgy, and I just would have never been happy with that bodge job. So I want to do it properly, okay? It just feels right. And after removing this spongy bung that was really heavy, it actually became really light. We've removed enough metal now. We're going to start adding new bits of metal. Well, by new bits of metal, this is a bit of the wing. We're going to weld that in to try and attempt to repair that. I just started putting patches here, there and everywhere to try and attempt to save some pieces. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to save that front panel yet, but we're going to keep on going. In this video, we're focusing on the front of the car, so we're just going to fill in all of the little holes, including these holes that are behind the shock absorber holders and this corner of the footwell. That was quite a complicated weld. Anyway, we continued to weld throughout the night, and well after the midnight snacks, it was time to remove the windshield from its steel prisoner abode, which thankfully did not reveal any more rust I wasn't expecting. So we're going to cut this bit off from the scuttle panel and just keep on strategically cutting pieces of metal off that are a little bit too rusty for my liking. And as dusk turned to dawn, the scrap metal pile really did start adding up, and yeah, it revealed a lot of problems. And after a gallon or so of rust converter, we had to keep on sweeping pieces of car from the floor. This rust hole was an interesting challenge. We had to flick the high accuracy switch on the angle grinder to be able to cut little bits around it, so we could be able to put a little triangle in there so we can weld it and then grind it down using the Dremel, because it was a very fine little piece, and it turned out okay. But this was a perfect time to be able to try and add the patina back in. I've decided to go for coach enamel to do this, strangely enough, so we're going to paint it in the Brooklands racing green, and then we're going to mush it up to try and make it fit the rest of the paintwork. This tiny bit of metal was rather important because it had to match up to the new panels above. We're not going to put the new panels on the front until nearly at the end of the restoration, but we keep on picking the car apart. I had to take this bit off so we could get to a bit of metal that was between that bit of metal and the other bit of metal. That bit of metal right there, which is actually the top of this panel called the Flitch Panel. So this is a replacement, and I've cut the car to the replacement replacement. You can do the replacement to the car. I decided because there was so much rust, I just did the whole panel. So we've plug welded it where it's supposed to be plug welded, and then seam welded it to the inner sill so it all connects up nicely. After that, we grind it down. I didn't fully grind this down because it was more important to have a strong weld. Yeah, baby! Anyway, after adding some rust-proof primer, we did exactly the same on the other side, making sure the welds fully penetrate without any holes in between. I forgot to film this part, but I removed all of the underseal, made sure there was no more rust, converted it, and then sprayed over the top of what was left with, and then it looks like this.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, so I've had this for nearly a week now, and it's looking a little bit worse than when it turned up in ways, but also better at the same time. I've been doing it in drips and drabs whenever I can, but I think, you know, the progress is looking all right. The biggest issue I've got at the minute is waiting for the parts to turn up. For instance, this panel in my hand just turned up, but I also need the one on the other side, and that one hasn't turned up. So yeah, in part 2, we're gonna start moving back into the rest of the car, and we're also gonna bolt it up to a rotisserie chicken machine. I'm uploading these videos every week, but I'm a lot further forward than this, and if you want to see where I'm at, well, go and check out on Patreon, because I've been talking about it ever since I got this, which right now was a week ago. Anyway, until next time, I'm Look Mum No Computer. This is the Green Bogey. I don't know, what do you reckon we should call it? And I'll see you in the next one.
Let us know below what you think, whether this has been truly bodged or not. I am about 2 episodes ahead of myself. If you want to see the updates and stuff, check it out over on Patreon. My obsessive focusing trait is really clinging onto this project at the minute, so I'm going to try and get it done as quickly as possible before I lose interest. So place your bets if I get it done in the next couple of weeks.